Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elise Hummel-Vitale, and I'm a Senior Advocate with California Food Policy Advocates. Welcome to the CEP and LCFF webinar. We have lots of partners for this webinar today, including our co-hosts, FRAC and Partnership for Children and Youth, and also my co-presenters, including folks from the California Department of Education, Fresno Unified School District, San Diego Unified School District, and Santa Ana Unified School District. Next slide. Before we get into our presentation, a few quick tips on how to participate in this webinar. As a reminder, you may listen to this webinar through your computer speakers or by telephone. We have lots of attendees today, so everyone is muted and will remain muted throughout the webinar. If you have a question, please submit it in your GoToWebinar control panel under the Questions tab. Please do submit your questions as we go along. We will do our best to answer them, but even if we run short on time, we do want to know your questions. CFPA is in the process of developing an online resource about CEP and education funding, and your questions will absolutely inform this tool. We'll do our best to respond after the webinar to your questions if we aren't able to answer them today. We are recording this webinar, and it will get posted to cfpa.net along with a PDF of the slides. To stay up to date on this work and forthcoming materials, please make sure to sign up for CFPA's Nutrition Action Alert at cfpa.net/subscribe. Next. A quick overview of how we'll structure today's webinar. Allison Morris from FRAC will provide a very brief overview of the Community Eligibility Provision and its intersection with federal Title I funding. Excuse me. And then I will share a few quick details about policy that allows California's educational funding to work more smoothly with CEP. And then we have three nutrition service professionals joining us on a panel today to discuss how they've made CEP work well with LCFF in their districts. And then lastly, the California Department of Education is here to answer some of the most frequently asked questions about CEP and education funding. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Allison Morris, a Child Nutrition Policy Analyst with Food Research and Action Center.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Elise, for your introduction and for everyone taking the time to listen in. As Elise said, my name is Allison Morris, and I'm with the Food Research and Action Center. We are a national nonprofit organization working to fight hunger and undernutrition in the United States. And my work primarily is focused on the Community Eligibility Provision. Next slide. So quickly, I just want to go through how community eligibility works. So community eligibility allows high poverty schools to provide breakfast and lunch at no cost to all students while also eliminating the traditional school meal application for families. Any school district can use this option if at least one of its schools has 40% or more students certified for free school meals without needing to submit an application. These are known as identified students, and they're typically identified through direct certification. Next slide. So there are many benefits for community eligibility, but particularly appealing is that it does eliminate the school meal application process and collection, although in your state you do have to collect alternative forms for LCFF, which we will be talking about later on in the webinar. But a great part is that all students benefit from eating at no cost, and therefore your participation in school meals increases, particularly in breakfast, especially if you are able to also implement a breakfast after the bell model. Because you no longer charge students for meals based on their eligibility category, serving students is more streamlined, and breakfast after the bell is easier to operate. And of course, if your participation increases, your financial viability will be better. And when all children eat at no cost, there is no way for anyone to build up any unpaid meal debt, which means that you no longer have to spend staff time tracking down families for money, which nobody enjoys. So next slide. School districts have a lot of flexibility in how they actually participate. They can have each school participate separately with their own reimbursement formula. You can have a group or multiple groups, or you can actually participate as an entire district with one claiming formula. Really, all that's important is that any combination of these is that the combined identified student percentage is at least 40%. The next slide. I'll just quickly go over, so who are these identified students? Many of you are familiar. These are the students that are identified through direct certification. So any student who is enrolled in SNAP, TANF, the DIPPR, and Medicaid, your state is one of the Medicaid pilot direct cert states, so you definitely should be utilizing that data to determine which students are eligible for free meals. And then students who are also can be directly certified and included in that identified student percentage are students that are in foster care, Head Start, homeless, and migrant. And these students are typically identified at the district level and will not be included in your state match. So these are groups of children that you should work with your homeless liaison, school counselor, etc., to identify them and make sure that they are included in your ISP. Next slide. So this is the actual formula that's used to determine the number of meals that are reimbursed at the free federal rate and those that are reimbursed at the lower paid rate. So you'll notice that the reduced price category is completely eliminated through community eligibility. So for example, if your student population has 50% of those students being identified through direct certification, then and then you multiply that ISP by 1.6, that is the percent of meals that will be reimbursed at the free rate. So in this case, 50% identified student percentage means 80% of meals will be reimbursed at the free rate, while 20% of meals will be reimbursed at the paid rate. So many of you may be wondering, where does this 1.6 multiplier come from? So just as a reminder, those students that are identified through direct certification is really just a subset of the low-income population at your school. More children would be identified as eligible for free school meals had a school meal application been collected. So USDA came up with this 1.6 multiplier to account for all those students that may not be enrolled in those need-based programs such as SNAP or Medicaid, but do meet the income requirements for free school meals. So this is just a way to make sure that that the district is fully capturing just how much poverty is in their student body. Next slide. So I just really quickly wanted to show an example of what we mean by grouping. So in this example, you have 3 different schools, and you take the total number of identified students. So in this example, that's 248. You take the total number of enrolled students between the 3 schools, and in this example, that's 420, and you divide the identified students by the total enrollment, as you can see in the formula below, and that actually equals 59%. So it's just a good reminder that when you group schools, it's not like an average of all the ISPs. You're actually doing a new calculation based on the total number of identified students across all of the schools in the group and the total enrollment. And it would be the same if you wanted to do one big district-wide group, then you would actually take the total enrollment from the entire district and the identified student number of identified students across the entire district, and that's how you would determine your district-wide identified student percentage. Next slide. So now I want to talk about community eligibility in Title I. And I just want to get started by saying I really encourage everyone to look at the guidance that is hyperlinked on this page. This is really going to have a lot of the answers that you're going to need regarding community eligibility in Title I. So what I've done in this presentation is that I've pulled out questions that are in this document that I believe are the most relevant to you. So I don't want you to get bogged down in thinking that you need to be federal education funding formula experts, because you don't. Really all I'm trying to say with showing this is that because National School Lunch Program data has often been used for Title I funding allocation, that is how community eligibility gets involved just to begin with. So at the basic level, CEP and Title I are connected because National School Lunch Program data are often used as an indicator of poverty. And that's about what you need to know in terms of how money is actually allocated to the district. Next slide. So when using National School Lunch Program data as a poverty measure for Title I, which types of data may be included? So you can actually use a combination of data, and it can be a combination from household applications in addition to direct cert data. It can be just the free meals identified through the household app or the direct cert data. Or you could actually just use the direct certification data for all the schools. And this is not something that is new. This is how Title I has always been, so community eligibility does not change this in any way. Next slide. So at the top, if an LEA includes a CEP school in their district, must the LEA use National School Lunch Program data for Title I? No. There's actually many different sources of data. They can use census data and things like that. So just so you're aware, again, this is just something so that you're aware of it. But no, there are other ways to be measuring poverty in the district. Now, the next question is, may an LEA use CEP data to allocate Title I funds? And yes, the answer is yes. So this is really important because if a school administrator does come talk to you about, how will they count poverty in the district now that you're not collecting the free and reduced price applications, you can say, well, actually, the data that we collect for community eligibility can also be used for Title I allocation. So you'll see here, children that are eligible for reduced price meals, but then also families that are receiving state program funding such as TANF or using the Medicaid program. So, and then you can also use a combination of all those. So next slide. So if there was one slide that I want you to keep in your back pocket when talking about community eligibility, and Title I, this is the one. So this is going to actually really dive into the part that is more relevant for you and where you're going to get the most of your questions, is how will community eligibility impact how Title I funds are allocated within the district? So there's a number of ways that you can use CEP data or not to make this allocation. Really, all that is important is that the district is using the same poverty measure or comparable poverty measures across all of the schools. So in the first example, you can multiply the number of students identified by direct certification, also known as your ISP, and then use the 1.6 multiplier. And so you can take that, use that at all the CEP schools, and because that 1.6 multiplier is meant to account for the difference in poverty rates when using free and reduced price meal data for non-CEP schools, it makes it a comparable data measure. So at the CEP school, you use ISP times 1.6, and then at the non-CEP school, you just use the free and reduced price application count. And that way, it is a comparable data set. You cannot compare just direct certification counts with free and reduced price applications because that's not a comparable data set. We know that the ISP, like I said before, is just a subset of the number of children eligible for free school meals. So that 1.6 multiplier is very important to make sure that it's a comparable data set across all schools. The other option is that you can actually just use direct certification numbers for all schools, whether they're CEP or non-CEP. Like I said, CEP hasn't changed the way Title I funds are determined or allocated. It's simply that now it kind of changes that some schools are using CEP while others are not, but you can actually just use the direct certification data for every school and that be all, and it is going to be a comparable data set. And then the other option is that you use the ISP for all CEP schools and non-CEP schools and still multiply it by 1.6. And so this is another way that you can just make it easier to be using the same exact measures across all of the schools. So like I said, you know, you don't have to be experts on Title I funding as nutrition directors, but what is important is that you can explain that CEP is not going to totally change the process of how this of how Title I funds are allocated. There is a possibility that Title I funds can shift, you know, if the district does start using a different poverty measure. And so that is a discussion that you need to have with your district administrators. But it should not by any means be a deterrent from participating in the program because of the many benefits that it does bring to students. So I wouldn't let that overwhelm you. The next slide.
Allison, one minute warning.
Okay, great. Yeah, so these next slides we can just go through. I just wanted everyone to have the CDE Title I information. There's contact info. Next slide. I wanted to reiterate the deadline to opt into community eligibility and the application process that I found on CDE's website. So this lays out the steps that you need to do in order to actually apply for community eligibility in California. Next slide. And just some additional resources. Definitely check out FRAC's community eligibility page and also USDA CEP Resource Center. And definitely check out that Title I guidance that DOE put out with regard to community eligibility, because it really is going to answer most of your questions. Okay, next slide. And that's just my contact info. Please reach out to me with any questions. I'd love to connect, and I'll pass it back to you, Elise.
Thanks, Allison. That was great. Okay, so now I want to shift our focus to our California education funding, the local control funding formula, also known as LCFF. In 2013, the California legislature passed Governor Brown's proposal to overhaul the way California schools are governed and funded. Among other goals, LCFF aims to fund schools more equitably based on student needs. The formula provides additional funds to high-need students who are categorized as English learners, foster youth, or low income, as determined by eligibility to receive a free or reduced price school meal. Next slide. The heart of LCFF is the funding formula, which places high-need students at its center. All school districts under LCFF receive a uniform base amount per pupil, varying only depending on the grade level. On top of the base grant, districts receive additional funds or supplemental grant based on the number of high-need students. For each high-need student enrolled, the district can receive an additional 20% of the base. And then on top of that, when high-need students make up at least 55% of a district's enrollment, districts receive a concentration grant equal to 50% of the base grant for every high-need student above the 55% threshold. So as you all probably know, and maybe the reason why you're listening in today, the process of identifying and certifying high-need students is very important for the district, and the stakes are extraordinarily high. Next slide, please. For these reasons and more, back in June 2014, my organization, CFPA, celebrated a small but really important policy change that better aligned LCFF with access to free school meals. To support schools in their decision to serve meals universally free to all students and to ensure that these schools can continue to maximize their educational resources, policymakers amended California's education code. Districts participating in CEP and other school meal provisions like P2 may establish a base year for the purposes of the local control funding formula. By determining the students who are eligible for free or reduced price meals and using that eligibility for the following 3 years. The students in CEP schools who are identified as meeting the income eligibility based on direct certification, categorical eligibility, or by alternative income forms retain their eligibility for the purposes of LCFF in subsequent non-base years. The data collected in the base year can be used for those annual LCFF program records that must be submitted to CalPADS. And the only new data to be collected by a district in those subsequent non-base years is for the newly enrolled students. These were welcomed policy changes because they prevent districts from having to collect income data for each student each year. Okay, so next slide. Now I want to shift into our nutrition service panel. On the panel today, we have 3 experts in the school nutrition field. We have Jennifer Maroney, Business Manager with Food and Nutrition Services for San Diego Unified. We have Mark Chavez, Director of Nutrition Services for Santa Ana Unified School District, and Jose Alvarado, Food Service Director with Fresno Unified School District. Welcome, panel. Are you guys all there?
Yes, we're here.
Yes, we're here.
Great. Wonderful. I'm really excited to dig into your experiences and your expertise. So the first question is for all 3 of you. What is your district's process for distributing and collecting alternative household income forms? Jennifer, will you go first?
Good afternoon. Thank you. Basically, our district starts with basically letting the different principals and site staff know which kind of form they're needing to use, whether it's an alternate income form or a child meal application, since we are at we don't have full implementation of CEP. And our office, the food service office, is the one who established that form and helps to distribute it. And then we also have a video that allows the principals to see and their site staff know exactly why these forms are so important, how they're tied to LCFF, how they're tied to Title I, and overall funding of the district. Then the principal is required to identify someone at each site that they are in charge of collecting the LCFF forms. It's typically the Title I coordinator on site, but sometimes it's different. Then the alternate forms are sent to the sites early in the school year, and they're distributed usually in the back-to-school packets. And then after a few weeks, the district matches up which students have already turned in their alternate income form. They do this by a process. They have made their form scannable, so it's easy for them to process and see who has turned it in, who has not. And then they also match up to who has been directly certified in the district through food services, and then sends out a list to the sites of who still needs to be targeted. So the original, they start with the full-fledged, everyone gets the form, and then explains the importance of it, and then it's more targeted as the year goes on, especially middle of September to the middle of October, when those forms become very important. That's pretty much the process. It's pretty basic. Our district's been doing this since LCFF was implemented, because we had Provision 2 schools at that time. So our district has been very familiar with that. The one time that it became a little bit challenging was in the last couple of years. We've had a lot of turnover with the principals, and we've also added 18 schools that were not a provision school originally. And that's what I have.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. I also think it might be interesting if you would quickly share just your success. I know you've saved a whole bunch for the district in unpaid meal debt. Could you quickly speak to that?
Yes, I believe the total amount for at least the year that we implemented was going to be about $20,000 for 18 schools. So we implemented mid-year that year due to some different things going on. So we probably would have been more than that. And then we've also been able to get those alternate income forms that are just much easier to fill out than a school meal application if you design it as such, where they can just pick the number of people in their household and then the range of income they have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so Mark, I have the same question for you. What is your district's process for distributing and collecting alternative household income forms?
Absolutely, and so thanks for the question. I'd like to just for a brief second highlight the fact that back in 13-14 school year, when LCFF was about to be born, I saw a great opportunity for the meal program here in Santa Ana Unified to really take charge and drive the bus with this effort and aligning it to the needs and desires of getting on board with CEP as it was going to come around for California. So I'd like to encourage food service directors to really look at this as a great opportunity to be in the driver's seat and support your district while you're also doing what you do best for your own meal program. In our district here for Santa Ana Unified, what we do is we build out an annual plan, which already we've been doing over and over for the last few years, because it's a great vehicle to use for visibility purposes. And it outlines our action steps. And so this is identifying the key players, their respective responsibilities, the community outreach and communication to the variety of stakeholders. So whether it's a principal, office manager, the cabinet level superintendent, the board, our parents, our own cafeteria personnel, or other staff in the district that also may be parents within the community. And so all of those things are included in our action plan. And we also have some of the more administrative details, such as developing the letters that will be going out, the design of the actual alternative form. In our district, we utilize what is very familiar to the nutrition program in terms of a meal application. The alternative form is available online and on paper. And so we utilize Rocket Scan, which is a very familiar third-party application to help process meal applications. But we went to those same respective vendors and said, hey, we need some help in California with the LCFF requirements, because we're going to be managing the process for the district. We're the experts, and therefore, let's just continue doing business as we know. We have good practices with meal applications. And so we use those same processes in terms of processing meal applications to process those alternative forms. There was a big need for education of our district personnel and administrators that this is not associated with the meal program. And you have to make that distinction. And so I think through several meetings and trainings, we were successful with that. So I would encourage that you have over a period of time before you even get to the summer or the end of the school year, that you talk to your administrators at their principals meetings that they regularly have, and just tell them, hey, in the horizon, this is what's coming forward, but it's not associated with the meal program. This is how it benefits you. One of the things that my CBO really gave me as teeth was the talking point to say, the fact that if any shortfalls in revenue with the general fund, it's going to trickle down to their site discretionary budgets. And so that is when you catch principals' attention, because all principals want all the revenues in their discretionary funds available. So that is when you start really seeing the collaboration between yourself and the school sites, the teachers, and sharing the importance and the significance of the impact related to not doing a good job in this area, because it could mean less funding for the district. We don't want to point out exactly what would that mean from a fiscal perspective and staffing, because that could set off some alarms and make people nervous. But just really emphasizing the fact that we're going to get less funding, and that's not what we want in our district, because we want to make sure that we continue all of the programs and interventions and great things that your respective districts are doing. So overall, that's really what we did. And we also, the last piece that I want to emphasize is that we work with our technology department to provide a good tool for both ourselves in the Nutrition Services Department and school administrators to use, which is a weekly report to identify which students, as we process the alternative forms in our software, and then updated ARIES with the respective eligibilities issued based on those forms. We identified which students had submitted and which have not yet for that time period. So principals had a visible report accessible to them to say, okay, out of each classroom teacher, because we filtered it by classroom teacher for the elementary grades, in the secondary grades, we made it by a designated class period that the students would attend, typically their first period or their last period in sixth period. And so those principals were able to work with their school teachers and say, hey, you got 15 students left to go until all of them have satisfied the submission of this alternative form. So that was another great vehicle to use that I would share and highlight with all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for all those tips. That's very helpful. Okay, so then Jose, same question to you. What is Fresno's process for distributing and collecting alternative household income forms? How do you guys make it work?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd be happy to share that with you. In Fresno, as Jennifer mentioned, when the LCFF was first rolled out, we began the alternate income form because we had 80 schools on Provision 2. So we were already having to do that. But so we were pretty familiar with it when CEP rolled out. So the direct cert information, we have that in food services, and we share that with our state and federal department. And they're the department that kind of coordinates the alternate income forms to schools. So we send them that direct certification data so they can identify students that do not need to complete the survey. So that helps them out with not having to go have every student fill out a alternate income form. And so we send out the survey only to the newly enrolled students also every year. And it's a package that our state and federal department puts together of the students that need to fill out the form. And it's part of the start of school packet in September. The information is sent out, and our state and federal department kind of takes the lead on that. We work closely with them if they have any questions about the DC. And then information is sent out to the schools and the homes and the parents. And so then the big challenge is with the principals. And as Mark mentioned, that principals understand the significance of returning the form because it does drive their site funding. So in Fresno, what we've done to incentivize our sites to return the form is, we've offered Fresno Fair tickets to each student that returns the survey, and that's been a big hit. In addition, the Fresno County Fair donates a family pack of 4 tickets with unlimited rides, and that is raffled off to all the students that bring in the form. They get a raffle ticket. So the Fresno Fair tickets have been a great, incentive. The principals provide some school pencils, some different gifts, like a special basket to the class that brings back most of the surveys back with pencils, erasers. And then we also have a department that's called Parent University, and it's a department that does community outreach with parents, our key stakeholders in our community, and they've been successful in engaging our parents to help fill out those forms and making phone calls and getting it set up. But so the alternate income form, it's a team effort, working closely with fiscal, our Parent University, our state and federal department. But the form, since we've been doing it since LCFF started, it seems to have been working well for our district. So, and we've had good luck with that. So that's our process. I think it's at the site level that really where the hard work is being done, is to collect the forms, incentivize parents. And the analogy we've used is when we were doing meal applications at our 20 schools, our team would go out to schools and do back to school nights, connect with parents wherever we could connect with them to do the meal applications. So for the most part, it really hasn't been such a big burden for the district, and we've been able to work through it.
Thanks so much, Jose. You know, I know that the alternative applications are new to many districts, and so thank you to all three of you for sharing how you've been successful within your districts in distributing and getting those forms back in. So, Jose, the next question is for you. If you'll advance the slide, do you find that you need to be an expert on LCFF? How much detail do you as the food service director really need to know about LCFF? And who do you talk to when you have an LCFF question?
Right, and that's a great question.
Sorry, just real quick, the slide, there we go. Okay, go ahead, Jose. Sorry about that.
All right, that's a great question. I don't need to be an LCFF expert. You know, we were the meal application experts. We were the Provision 2 experts. But I really have not found myself having to be an LCFF expert. But what I have learned is that we've been learning how to work across departments. And when LCFF was implemented, you know, we began kind of a team effort to work with our different departments, our school sites, our principals, parent university, our research and evaluation department, and we got a great state and federal department and a great fiscal services group working together along with technology services to collect that alternate income form. So we were collecting alternate income form when LCFF kicked in to 82 schools because they were on Provision 2. The other schools, 20 or more, were on meal applications. So then I think the following year, the CEP kicked in. So our district said, okay, we're going to roll out CEP. We just got to collect more alternate income forms at the 20 schools. But we work closely with technology services. They saw our meal application. They looked at it. They created their own form for the district. And but working with fiscal services, it was important to work with them to understand the revenue coming in on CEP. State and federal department, they collect the forms. We send them the direct certification data so they don't have to ask parents to fill out forms that are not required. So it's just been a big team effort. So in our food services department, our accountant, our eligibility clerk, we've all learned how to work better together. And it's all been, you know, for the benefit of our kids, which are universal breakfast and universal lunch district-wide.
That's so awesome to hear. Thank you, Jose. So next question. Mark, this question is for you. What are your suggestions about working across departments in your district to make sure that CEP and LCFF work well together?
Sure. It's very important. I think Jose highlighted the perfect term for it. It's a team effort. And so sharing your experiences of responsibility. So in Santa Ana's case, we are responsible in managing the LCFF collection effort for the district. And so we're always engaging with the technology department, the budget department, the human resources department, our entire business division, really, but most importantly, our school principals. Our school principals are the local ambassadors, if you will, to help spread the word of the importance of completing the LCFF form and also sharing how it impacts our academic programs. And so sharing those, the who, what, how, when is very important internally as a staff so that we can tell that story with our parents and students when we have to engage with them to help follow up with the household or with their own parents. And I think that another thing that is very helpful is just being prepared, having a plan in place, and being able to be proactive in identifying when principals meet, identifying critical dates, like Jose was talking about a back-to-school event. Well, every elementary, intermediate, or junior high and high school have them. They may not all occur on the same date. So really know when big activities where you have parents coming to school grounds happen, so that way you can help support the school in pursuing those applications and getting them turned in completely. And so those would be the things that I would suggest to everyone on the webinar.
Mark, I found it really interesting a few years ago when you told me that when your district was making the decision to go to CEP, and that was at a similar time with LCFF, that you volunteered yourself as Nutrition Service Director to lead the alternative app collection process. And I'm wondering if you could just say a word or two about why you made that decision and how successful it's been.
Sure. So the reason why I wanted to be in front of that was because I knew that the district, when big programs or initiatives such as a change in LCFF for school funding was changed in the entire state, it's very, very impactful. And so it takes time to get to a certain level of comfort. And so as we were the experts and we had done a district-wide provision effort in prior years, we had the capability, the know-how that could support the district. And we did it with the interest of students in mind, as well as our parents. And so that was really something that I saw that could benefit the district. And so I worked with my deputy superintendent, who is now our superintendent, and said, let me help you. And I can help secure a good response rate because we already are the experts in collecting new applications. So this is very similar work. I believe that the only thing you have to really be concerned with is making sure that you reimburse me for all of the labor costs and administrative duties that my team carries out. And that was probably the least item of worries, because that was done in a single transaction. After we were done with the meal collection effort, they reimbursed us with all the costs. But at the end of the day, what was successful was that in the beginning years, for Title I and even E-rate monies, those funding buckets for the general fund saw an increase because we were able to identify a larger pool of students that were of a needy or poverty level. And so that really benefited the E-rate money by like almost $3 million in that first year, because schools had a greater response. And so that was very helpful to the district. And of course, with supplemental and concentration monies being greater above the base year level funding, Santa Ana was able to secure additional funding also for the general fund.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so then the last question for the panel is for Jennifer. Jennifer, will you talk about what are your district's best practices for maximizing direct certification for base years?
So we are always looking at increasing direct certification for many reasons. One, to streamline the process for the parents and streamline the back to school in 30 days are the school sites that are not provision schools, and for district claiming purposes for LCFF and Title I. We never stop trying to match siblings or bringing in files. One thing that I found that has been very beneficial is by bringing in the file as early as July, starting that process as soon as I can, working with my team to start doing the sibling matches. When we do sibling matches, we use a few different ways of identifying those students. With our software, it allows us to filter by certain items such as email addresses. I find that that's our easiest, fastest, quickest match. Then we have the ability to look at students that were matched together the previous years or that may have been on the application together. Another surefire tool that helps us a great deal, and I have found across the state it's not always a utilized option, which is getting a county match. So getting that MOU with your county and getting those local matches for your direct cert, your CalFresh folks, that helps a lot because they're faster. When you're using CalPads to match your students, first the students have to be uploaded into your system into CalPads, then the match has to happen, and then you have to get your monthly file. So it sometimes takes, a month or two to get those students completely identified. We also get a file from our homeless liaison. Actually, our SIS system identifies those students at enrollment, and we get a file every evening that we can bring in for homeless, runaway, migrant, and foster. And then we have our liaison sign off on those lists after we've uploaded them. Another thing we do is we work with the student information system folks to make sure we know when they're enrolling the kindergarten students into CalPads, making sure they're aware of the time lag, especially if they want to not enter them until October when they're more sure of who's in a seat. But educating them on how it affects the school district's dollars and the nutrition services office. So there's really a whole lot of aspects we implement, and it's a team effort as far as using consistently doing sibling matches on our side, and also working with our free and reduced software, making sure they know what our requirements are, and getting service requests to hopefully identify those students quicker and faster.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. A big thank you to our panel, Jennifer, Mark, and Jose. You guys are a power trio doing such great work, and we've all learned a great deal from you. So next up, we have the California Department of Education, who has assembled a team with expertise on CEP, LCFF, and Title I. I will let you all introduce yourselves, and then we'll dive into questions.
Hi, my name is Steve. I'm the manager of the Northern School Nutrition Programs Unit. I have my CEP subject matter experts here, Chelsea and Danielle, and then we have Ruth Ann from our LCFF office. So we'll get into you had 4 questions.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and pose them to you, and then we'll walk through them. I'm so glad you have everyone there. So question number 1, what are the basic guidelines for alternative household income forms, and where can folks find detailed explanations about these forms?
I will let Ruth Ann answer this one from our LCFF office.
Hi. Guidelines can be found on the CDE website. We have an LCFF FAQ page, and that page actually has a section specific for school districts that offer Provision 2, 3, or CEP. And in that section, there are 5 sample alternative forms, and it also lists the information that needs to be included on an alternative form. It's really simple. There needs to be information that identifies the student, information to determine if the pupil or household meets the federal income eligibility criteria sufficient to qualify for a free or reduced price meal, and then there needs to be certification that the information is true and correct by a pupil's adult household member or guardian, something along those lines. So the form itself can be very simple and straight to the point.
Great, thanks, Ruth Ann. So question number 2, will alternative household income forms be audited, and if yes, how so?
Yes, they are audited during an annual audit. Auditors will be looking to ensure documentation is available to support the free reduced price designation in CalPads. The auditors will also review the documentation to make sure that students are correctly identified as free or reduced price eligible.
Great. Question number 3. Can you tell us how alternative household income forms integrate with CalPads? We get a lot of questions about this. Is there computer software? What are the best practices?
There is no form of computer integration. Forms are collected from students. Eligibility determinations are made based on the income reported and household size. Based on this information, LEAs will manually input the data into CalPads, identifying students as free or reduced price eligible.
Okay, and then last question, can districts use a single alternative household income form for both Title I and LCFF, or do they have to be separate?
We don't recommend a single form, but there is the option per USDA. If you look up Policy Memo 542016, which is located on our website, linked to USDA and FAQs, they do have a alternate income form that is suggested that you could use. One of the problems, though, is that according to the Title I office, LEAs must use the same measure of poverty for all sites. So when you have a district that's got CEP sites and maybe standard counting sites or provision sites, for Title I purposes, they have to use the same measure for all sites. And they list 5 different choices for, if you look at Title I regulations, they have number 1, census data, number 2, free and reduced price meals, Social Security, Medicaid, or a combination of the above. Like I said, we can't recommend what school districts do, but the most likely one is your free and reduced priced, because whether you're on CEP or whether you're on a standard, you are doing what's required is collecting like meal applications on the non-CEP, and you're doing direct cert at the non-CEP, and then on the CEP side, you're doing the direct cert.
Wonderful. Okay, so it looks like we have just under 10 minutes for a couple more questions that have come in during the webinar. I will moderate this portion and direct questions to who I think could probably answer them best. So let's start with this one. Did I hear correctly the alternative income documents are collected once every 4 years and only for newly enrolled students? Yes, that is what you heard. If you, the policy change back in 2014 in Education Code, in the Education Code says that if you are a school offering a school meal provision like CEP or P2, you can establish a base year for the purposes of LCFF, and you just need to be making adjustments for incoming and outgoing students. The next question. And maybe, Mark, you can answer this one. If food services processes LCFF forms, how is that cost passed along to the general fund?
It is passed along via a invoice after we have those respective employees that are working on LCFF perform the personnel activity reports. So the total collective time and effort spent on LCFF is total per employee. Then you do the math of their payroll. Everyone gets paid differently, so you take their time and effort, multiply it by that payroll, and then you end up with a total balance, and then you forward that on to your accounting department or your CBO, and they will designate a budget transfer to cover those expenses, all of which is supporting documentation. So when you have an AR or a different audit, that you can support that the Nutrition Services Fund is not covering for those expenses.
Great, thank you. So, I'm not sure who to send this question to. So if everyone will listen and someone offer up. School eligibility data is also used by families to qualify for other benefits that might be offered by the city. For example, a cable discount or gas and electric discounts, after school program discounts, SAT discounts, et cetera, et cetera. What tool can be used to help these individuals qualify? Has anyone else dealt with this on the panel? Go ahead, Mark. Jose.
Go ahead, Jose.
Yeah, in Fresno, we get calls regularly for discounted internet connection. So we assess the call, the parent, and we provide them a little letter, stating what our free and reduced CEP equivalent is. So we help them out. And we've also had, I think, some high schools where they get the college entrance testing. They like to have the data. So we help the schools out with the data, because the free and reduced does drive a lot of programs. Occasionally we do get, even questions on E-rate.
Thank you, Jose. Okay, so the next one is for Ruth Ann. This is a couple of questions about the alternative form. For LCFF, does the alternate form need to break down income categories into free range and reduced ranges, or can a range of the combined be used to note eligibility? I'll start with that one.
Okay, so CalPADS, I believe, they used to have a category you would identify a student as reduced or as free. So I think you really do need that separation at this point, so that you can easily identify this student is free eligible, this student is reduced eligible. That will make your input into CalPADS a lot easier.
Does anyone, any of the nutrition panel, do you guys have, what do you do on your forms as best practices, if you're willing to share?
San Diego Unified does a range of free, reduced, and then above.
We do.
Any other tips? Okay, so then the next question is also for Ruth Ann. Can we make an online survey to collect income information for families instead of doing paper forms for the alternative income form?
You can. It would still need to meet all of the requirements for certification purposes. So we have referred to the requirements that are in place actually for NSLP, electronic acceptance of applications. So as long as your online form has all of those securities and safeguards in place, and a place for whoever's completing the form to certify the information, then that's fine.
Thank you. So the next question we asked of CDE, it is, how do the alternative forms integrate in the unduplicated pupil count on the CalPADS report? And Stephen, if I remember correctly, you said that you have to manually input them. Is that correct?
Yes, normally you have to, unless there's a system that I'm not aware of that can input information for you and somehow with CalPADS, normally on an annual basis, you will need to go into CalPADS and enter that student information. So each student that's identified as free or reduced based on their eligibility would go in and check the box for that student. And that information does fall out of CalPADS every year. So you will, if you have a base year, you will need to enter that information annually for all of those conditions.
Jennifer, Mark, or Jose, do you guys have any software that helps you do it more quickly than manually?
In Santa Ana, we do utilize Rocket Scan to help process the application itself. Then that provides electronic data to match it to the student ID and name to upload into our student information system, which all districts have. Then the data from the student information system flows into the CBEDS reporting tool. And so that is what is then uploaded electronically into the CalPADS system. So that's basically the workflow of the data after you process the application.
In Fresno, we're using kind of a Scantron equivalent form, and in looking at the form, it's Elite View is the software or company that does that. So it requires a number 2 pencil, so it tells you when to, not to mark outside of the circle. So it's kind of a Scantron form in Fresno.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm looking at the time, and I know that there were more questions. Unfortunately, we've run short in time, and I won't be able to answer. We won't be able to answer all of the questions that have come in today. But thank you so much for submitting questions. As I said earlier in the webinar at the beginning, your questions will inform a forthcoming online tool, and I will attempt to follow up with all of the individuals that didn't get clear answers through our presentations and panel discussions today. I'd like to say one more thank you to all of our partners and presenters today, and a big thanks to everyone participating in the webinar. Ensuring our youth are fed and have access to quality education is very important work, and we appreciate all that you do. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have. My information is about to be up on the screen. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye, everyone.